You are a fish.
Wow.
Yes, I agree.
Who are you?
Follow me.
This is a species. Species must be able to produce offspring. Species must be able to produce offspring that can make more offspring. So if their babies can't make babies, they're different species.
Thank you, David. But how do we develop into these distinct species? And how does this tie back to fish?
Wow, what a great question you just asked me, boy. I'll answer.
I didn't say anything.
All the life on Earth started a long time ago. The deep waters near the hot water vent on the ocean floor were the most likely source for the earliest life on Earth. Many, many years later, the tiny bacteria learned to harness the sun. The evolution of autotrophs, organisms that can make their own food, like plants and algae, could be considered the first example of speciation.
I'll take it from here. With plants moving onto land, the ocean was no longer the only option in terms of places to live. From fish, we got amphibians, then reptiles, then mammals, which eventually led to human beings.
That's cool, but why? Why would fish want to go on land?
Free food. There were plants on land that no one was eating, so it drove them to go on land and eat the largely uncontested food supply.
There are also no predators on land because they hadn't learned to walk yet.
Okay, that explains fish to amphibians, but what about amphibians to reptiles?
The amphibians were still largely dependent on the water because they didn't have strong eggs. This limited where they could live close to rivers, beaches, and lakes.
By developing tougher skin and harder eggs, they could sever their dependence on bodies of water and be able to move inland to prosper by occupying new spaces in the ecosystem.
That sounds cool, but how?
Yeah, I know. How did we get mammals? I'll tell you. The main drawback to reptiles is that when they're waiting for their eggs to hatch, they have to go guard them, or else hide them and risk them being discovered. Mammals, instead of having to be stationary to guard their eggs while they develop, keep the eggs inside them and give birth to live young.
With their young on them at all times, mammals got their time to shine once the dinosaurs went extinct.
Okay, but how do we get from mammals to humans?
Does your mother lay eggs, boy? Does she rely on water to live? Is she a fish? If the answer to all these questions is no, then you are a mammal. All humans are, in fact. Are there any other things that you're still confused about?
Yeah, the evidence is all cool and stuff, but source?
My source is that I dug it up. Well, not me, but other people have found fossils in the transitional stages that show halfway between fish and amphibians, for example. They have found the same general pattern in the configuration of bones in animal limbs, that being one bone, two bones, lots of bones, digits. They have also found genetic evidence of shared ancestry in the form of a gene that regulates the growth of limbs that is shared across all creatures.
The cause of all of this evolution is random mutation in some of the genes of an organism. As you can imagine, these mutations can be harmful to the organism and cause it to die. The organism did not get a chance to reproduce, so the genes that cause this do not get passed on down to the offspring.
Mutations aren't all that bad, however. Sometimes they can be beneficial to the organisms and cause it to overpower others in the species, because it can do its job better or more efficiently. This causes the beneficial gene to be passed down through the population. This process, known as survival of the fittest, is just natural selection at work.
All of the small mutations add up over time to lead to large-scale evolution that can be observed over a long period of time.
Okay, but if the weak ones die, how come there are still so many species on the planet today?
I'm so glad you asked. The process of speciation, how new species differentiate from the common ancestor, has two main ways of working. They could be separated and physically unable to interact or breed with each other. Or they could develop into different behaviors and no longer interact with each other in that way.
The finches that Darwin studied in the Galapagos Islands are the primary example of a species evolving apart from one another and no longer being able to produce viable offspring. The other form of speciation is a lot rarer and doesn't happen that often.
Even when a species doesn't split apart, there can still be traits that caused one organism to be adapted to its environment. However, the process of natural selection isn't the only process that guides the species to adapt to their environment. The environment itself can change, and just like that, and the traits that can be helping it survive could be its downfall.
In England, there was a moth that blended well with its habitat, the trees. The moth was the same white with black flakes as the bark of the trees. Then the Industrial Revolution happened. The air was rich with coal and dust. and the trees were covered in a layer of black dust.
Suddenly, that same gene that helped them blend into the white trees made them stick out like a sore thumb. The random moth with a black coloring before the trees turned was very unhelpful, and they wanted to stay hidden. So once the trees turned black, the adaptation that was once harmful made them adapt quicker and survive.
That's neat. One last question though. My dad keeps complaining about his back, and my mother has to wear glasses to see. Why does evolution keep these things around and not phase them out? Wouldn't they be considered less fit?
Finally, a good question. The reason that natural selection doesn't make the most optimal creatures is because natural selection can't tell what it's doing. As long as the creature reproduces before it dies, it doesn't matter if it spends the rest of its life in pain.
One example would be the animal native to some islands in Indonesia called the babirusa. It is similar to any other wild pig, except that two of its teeth grow through the roof of its mouth and out the top. One potentially deadly side effect is that these teeth can't get worn down. They can't be worn down because they're not used to chew. They keep growing throughout the animal's life, and if it lives long enough, it can even pierce the skull and injure the brain.
Obviously, if this happened earlier in the animal's life, that trait caused this would be killed off due to natural selection. However, since this happened after the animal reproduces and passed its gene to the next generation, it does not matter for natural selection.
The reasons that you gave about your father's back and your mother's eyesight are somewhat different. Today, in human society, we have glasses to correct poor eyesight, and we can use surgery to fix a bad back.
But the fact that you exist is a testament to the fact that evolution doesn't care. It is a force that cannot be controlled. The chain of random mutations and coordination with random events that cause the random evolution of you from fish to amphibian to reptile to mammal to human is extraordinary.
The fact that we can even trace our ancestry back to fish, be it through fossils, common bone structure, similarities in the very early stages of development, or through shared gene, is truly remarkable, and just goes to show how lucky we are to exist today.
I see. Thank you for teaching me the error of my ways. Thank you so much.
Goodbye, kid. He's going to get himself killed.
Yep.